When this video comes out, it will be 1 week until BioWare releases Dragon Age: The Veilguard. I want to talk about what that means for BioWare, how I think the game is going to be received, what it could mean for the upcoming, hopefully, Mass Effect game, as well as some other stuff that's kind of whipping around this game as well as others. So let's jump right on into it. I think what's interesting about this game is that it's been 10 years since the last Dragon Age game. Maybe even more so than that. You know, it's been 5, 6, 7 years since Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem came out. Two games that, you know, depending on who you talk to, could be blamed for the quote unquote downfall of BioWare, or a reflection of what BioWare is today compared to what it used to be. But I don't think it's that simple. There's been so many documentaries and stories and everything written and recorded about how Andromeda and Anthem happened. It's also hard, I think, to completely ignore that those games have their own merits, even if they aren't what people were really expecting from the kind of storied studio. Going back to, you know, the last Dragon Age game with Inquisition, that won Game of the Year. Now that's these days kind of a controversial situation where there were other games people feel like may have deserved it that year, but from the, you know, the most well-known Game of the Year award, which is currently the Game Awards with Jeff Keighley, it was their first, I believe, it was their inaugural show. And what's happened since then has been interesting. That was a game that came after the trilogy of Mass Effect had come out and been what it is, even if the third game had some controversy due to the endings. And then to kind of look at what's happened to BioWare since, it puts a lot of pressure on Dragon Age: The Veilguard, which itself has had its own issues. We're under the impression it's, you know, basically been in development in some sense for, you know, almost 8 years at this point, more than likely a little more. And there's so much discussion about what that means and how much is riding on Dragon Age: The Veilguard. I've said for a long time that I don't necessarily think, you know, everything for BioWare rides on what happens with this game when it comes out. Other people, even people who know some of the devs and, you know more than I do on the inside, have said that there is at least a feeling around BioWare that this is a big deal and that it needs to do well for a more secure future for them. You know, we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. If I were them, I would be pretty confident. I've gotten to see the build up and the excitement or whatever you would call it for Dragon Age: The Veilguard from really three different perspectives. I've seen it within my own community. We have a little Discord, as well as the comments and the people who, you know, watch my videos and come to my streams and so on. You know, there's also, I've peeked into the Dragon Age community, whether it's on social media or, you know, in YouTube videos and stuff like that. I've mostly stayed away because that is a scary place, at least for someone like me who's not super invested in the brand. And then I've also seen the perspective of this new game kind of from the outside as kind of a normie, someone who really enjoys Mass Effect, who really likes BioWare. But, you know, I think I've played about 15, 20 hours of Inquisition, and that's all I've ever done. And I will admit that I didn't really love it. It's not my type of game. So what I've seen in my own community is a ton of excitement. A lot of the people who have gotten to know my content, especially through my, you know, emerging love for Mass Effect after the Legendary Edition came out, are almost universally excited, if not a bit trepidatious, you know, a little concerned, just in general. And that's fine. That's fair, right? From the Dragon Age community, that's where it gets really wild. From where I've kind of peeked in, there's so much anxiety. There's also a ton of excitement from a lot of people, but there is a very vocal, you know, probably minority of that community that is so anxious. And I don't think it's all negative. I don't think it's all bad, but you can definitely tell there's a high level of anxiety there where, you know, when things like the choices from Inquisition that we're going to carry over and how looks like there's only going to be a few, you know, there was a lot of, you know, people upset about that in that community. And while I will argue that may not be the biggest deal in the world, at least from my perspective. To them, it obviously was. You can also check back to me one day when we're about to get a new Mass Effect game and we find out that, choices from the trilogy aren't going to matter. Then you can tell me if I'm being a hypocrite when that happens. But then, like, from my own, probably my best perspective, looking at, the anticipation for Veilguard from the outside, as someone who kind of watches the big gaming podcast and pays attention to the more like normie content creators and stuff. I don't think people within the Dragon Age community, the kind of more focused one, really understand that there's a ton of excitement for Dragon Age. And I think it comes from a few places. I think it comes from, people who played Inquisition or played the Mass Effect trilogy, and maybe haven't touched a BioWare game since, who are just excited for a BioWare game to come out. Then you've got, maybe the more casual Dragon Age fans who played Origins and 2 and Inquisition and are just excited for another Dragon Age, right? And then you may have just the general gamer, which is the one that I think, especially because of the style of this game, what we've seen so far, and that it's going to be a very friendly game to people who maybe aren't already fans of the franchise. There's just a general excitement, I think, for like a Western RPG that's going to have the romance and the choices and all of that, especially in the wake of Baldur's Gate 3, where I don't think this game's going to be like Baldur's Gate 3, which is a probably once in a lifetime type of game. But I think if you are into that high fantasy aesthetic, I think if you're into, the romances and the character interactions and all of that stuff, it's going to provide that, but in a different way. There's a lot of people who, including myself, who love Baldur's Gate 3, but don't particularly love, overhead, turn-based combat games. Dragon Age of the Veilguard looks like it's going to be an extremely fun game to play, aside from all of the RPG aspects and stuff like that. So that's where I've seen a lot of kind of normie folks who really aren't super hardcore Mass Effect or BioWare or Dragon Age fans seem very generally excited about this game. And that's the target audience. Obviously, they want to make the Dragon Age fandom happy. Obviously, they want to cater to people who have been in the fandom for a long time and the OGs. But it's been 10 years since the last game. People need to realize that a big target audience for them is going to be new players. It's going to be people who have never played the Dragon Age game before. And I think that's why I am probably going to enjoy it, because it's not going to be so dependent on being in the franchise already. Because when you have a decade in between games, you can't do that. Obviously, you still have some of your old fans around, maybe, a decent amount of them, but not enough to support a game, right? It's different than when you release a sequel 2 years after the first game. You still have that audience kind of built in. A decade later, you don't have as much of that audience built in. And so the way that they, I think, have done a good job of doing that balance of making sure this seems like a game that's going to be attractive to people brand new to the franchise, but also, give a nod to the people who have always been around. I think that's played out really well. And I think if you've been paying attention to the general kind of gaming landscape this year, I really do believe that there's no game in the second half of the year that people are more excited for than Dragon Age: The Veilguard. For me, I've mostly followed the development of this game and anticipated the release because I'm excited for them to move on to the next Mass Effect. As it's gotten closer and as we've seen more, I am more genuinely excited for the game itself. I'm curious to what a BioWare game looks like in 2024. I'm curious to what a BioWare game looks like after the lessons of Anthem, of Mass Effect Andromeda, the lessons from Inquisition and the Mass Effect trilogy and everything that came before. I'm really curious to how this is going to impact the future of BioWare. I think that my honest prediction is that we're going to have really good critical reception, probably good fan reception, outside of some loud minority voices from people who either with good or bad intent are going to hate it no matter what. But I really think that's going to get drowned out by a lot of the normies like me and the critics who are going to play it and hopefully have that BioWare is back moment. And I think the critics especially want that. When you see people talking about this, it's surprised people, I think. And you can tell it's given a lot of people hope who maybe just dabble in BioWare games and things like that, but still have that respect for the name. And it gets people excited, like, oh, okay, maybe BioWare's back. Oh yeah, and they are making that next Mass Effect game, and then so on. So, for what that means for BioWare and Mass Effect, it'd be a big deal. Well, I don't necessarily think that BioWare's existence hinges on this game, or at least the expected reaction I have to this game won't hurt BioWare. I think it's going to be received really well. The one thing I question is how many copies it's going to sell. Is it going to be kind of like everyone loved it, but not that many people buy it, and it sells 2 or 3 million copies, and that probably isn't enough? Or is it going to be this big hit at the end of the year and a little bit of a drought for games, at least of that type, and it sells 10 plus million, which would probably be a really good thing for BioWare and Dragon Age, and probably EA in general, right? For moving forward, it's going to be interesting how that impacts Mass Effect. They have this opportunity to kind of reestablish themselves. I still would argue, I think Mass Effect is still their more premier brand, but them knocking it out of the park with Dragon Age, I think would bring a lot of people back on board. Even someone like me who, my goal for Dragon Age is to be excited to finish it. It would be even better if it's a game where I'm like, I'm going to play that one more time and make some different choices. And it would be amazing if I want to play it over and over again, right? I still, though, believe it's more likely I'm going to play it, like it, and then be really excited for Mass Effect as we hear more about that. We'll talk about that in a different video. The kind of final thing I'm going to hit on this, because I think it kind of has to be said, and it's probably going to be a bit of a rant. I encourage anyone who gets into this to mind who you're listening to, including myself. But there's going to be, and there already is, a segment of the gaming commentary sphere who has already decided how they feel about this game, has made that very obvious, and for reasons that I would argue are stupid is the best word I have. If you're involved in gaming social media or pay attention to YouTube and stuff like that, you'll probably already know what I'm talking about. But I'm addressing these people, this anti-woke, anti-DEI, anti-Sweet Baby Inc. These people who, they're a small number of people. It's not very many, but they're very loud. And whether it's organic or not, their supporters elevate their voices a lot. And I'll never have an issue with people just having different opinions. There's obviously nothing wrong with that. That's typically a good thing. My issue is that the intent and the purpose behind people's opinions sometimes, especially in the content creation world, can be tough. I still, to this day, believe one of the worst things that happened to discourse in general in the world, but especially in the gaming world, discourse has been ruined by monetization. Monetizing social media, monetizing YouTube, monetizing gaming commentary and hot takes in general. It's so easy to be monetized nowadays. And if you hit something right, whether it's good for the conversation or not, you can be very profitable. There's a handful of people who have made entire careers off of failing to make actual content and succeeding in clickbait, rage bait, engagement bait, saying awful things or having awful opinions that are misinformed, dishonest, and just kind of toxic in general. There's no real check for that because, unfortunately, the hot take rules. It's just a race all the time for who can have the hottest take. And it's so easy to do. One of the most frustrating things is, there's a handful of these grifters, which is what I consider them, who surround themselves by other creators who are like losers, who are nobodies. And, I'm not naming names because I'm not getting into all that. But specifically, there's a bunch of drama going around right now about a couple of these, kind of baiting people who have unfortunately become fairly well known, who have surrounded themselves by these other people who have even like smaller channels and presences than I do. If you fail to do well in the grifting game, then you're truly a bad creator. And unfortunately, that's becoming more and more common because, and I even saw it back in my Division 2 content creation days, of people who seemed like they genuinely wanted to have a voice, talk about certain parts of a game or talk about the story or this or that. And, they put out 10, 15, 20 videos and they got a few views each and it wasn't working. And then they make a video ranting about something and being really toxic and awful about something. And that video gets a few hundred views. And then they do it again and that video gets a couple thousand views. And then they get addicted. So whether or not they even really believe in the things they're saying, they go down that path because it's easy. It's simple. You don't even have to think to make these kind of videos or that kind of content. And almost every one of these people I'm speaking about, if you look in their history, they got there because they failed at doing the thing they actually wanted to do. And they found this kind of cheat code. So for me, you can rip on me, you can call me bald or fat or, say that my content's not successful. I have over 1,000 videos on this channel. My channel only has a couple thousand subs. I'm happy to get a couple hundred views on a video. I'm good with that. This isn't my job. I'm not trying to make it my life. This is something I do for fun. And seeing people not have that perspective and going down a certain path is tough. And more than anything, I hate what it's done to online discourse because it's essentially ruined it, especially in the gaming world, arguably in other things as well. I just had to get that out. I'm really excited for Dragon Age the Veilguard. I'm excited to see what happens with BioWare in the future. I'm not excited for all of this discourse. My best advice, and something I should probably listen to myself, block out the noise, literally, if you can, and just try to focus on things you enjoy and finding people who also enjoy those things, whether they're, fellow community members, content creators, so on and so forth. Let me know how you're feeling about Dragon Age the Veilguard, what you're excited for, what you think is going to happen with BioWare, what you're excited for the next Mass Effect. We also have In 7 Day coming up for that. So be sure to subscribe to this channel if you like any of that stuff. You want more of my commentary and kind of reporting on it. In 7 days is going to be very busy for me. I can't wait to dive into all the speculation and analysis on whatever they show us. If you like this video, please hit the like button. Leave a comment down below with whatever you think. Subscribe to the channel. Check out all my links in the description of the video if you want to support or check out the other things I do, including a couple gaming podcasts I have. That is all I have for this one. So until next time.